The Second World War claimed 70 million lives worldwide. The offensive of the Hitler coalition was stopped only by the extraordinary efforts of the Western Allies and the USSR. What was America's role in this bloody war? Why do many regard the US's contribution as crucial to a common victory over Germany and Japan? At the beginning of World War II, the United States was formally neutral. American society and political elites, however, reacted negatively to Nazi Germany's conquest of Poland and Japan's takeover of East China. The Americans rightly regarded this military expansion of the anti-Comintern Pact countries as a prologue to the more aggressive actions of the invaders worldwide. When Germany defeated British and French forces on the continent and attempted to conquer Britain, the U.S. decided to provide material support to its ally and largest trading partner. For that purpose, Franklin Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Act in March 1941, which provided United States allies, primarily Britain, with free leases of arms, military equipment, and other essential industrial goods. A total of $31 billion worth of goods and products were provided to Britain. Also, on October 1, 1941, the Soviet Union was granted a lend-lease of $13 billion. The most sought after were the American heavy bombers, as there were very few such aircraft in the Soviet Union and Britain. Large quantities of food and cars were also delivered to the Soviet state. 65% of USSR frontline vehicles were American-made. After Japan invaded Southeast Asia, occupied French Indochina, and violated the Washington Treaty, the U.S. decided to impose an oil embargo on the aggressor. This step increased tensions between states and accelerated the escalation of aggression by the Japanese leadership. On 7 December 1941, Japanese forces numbering 414 combat aircraft, 38 ships, and several dozen submarines attacked the United States' largest base in the Pacific Ocean, Pearl Harbor. As a result of this completely unexpected strike, the Japanese destroyed 8 battleships and 188 American aircraft. More than 2,400 Americans were killed in the attack, and Japan lost only 29 fighters. This victory allowed Japan to temporarily weaken its strongest opponent and led to domination by sea and air in the Asian part of the Pacific. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan's allies Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. Japanese forces, with total domination in the air and ocean, advanced on Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines at the same time as the attack on Hawaii. 40,000 U.S. troops were deployed in the Philippines, which, along with the 110,000-strong Philippine Army, resisted the advancing Japanese army for more than 6 months. Taking advantage of the military hardware, additional reinforcements from Indonesia, and the Americans' lack of supplies, the Japanese conquered the Philippines, capturing more than 18,000 Americans. Despite the initial defeats, U.S. forces and their allies managed to stop the Japanese army's advance in 1942. The countries of the anti-Hitler coalition had much stronger economies and larger populations, with which they rebuilt their forces. So the total GDP of the Allies this year was $1,862 billion, and the opponent's one was only $902. New American fighters and bombers were significantly ahead of the Japanese and German. In addition, this year the number of produced aircraft in the United States was more than 47,000. Germany and Japan produced, in total, less than 42,000 aircraft, most of which were produced in the Third Reich. This gave the Americans and their allies an air advantage. The Doolittle raid became the best demonstration of the capabilities of the new American aircraft. During this campaign, Tokyo was bombed on April 18, 1942. Also, there was an undeniable advantage of the Allies in the number of tanks produced. This year, the United States released 26,000 tanks, Germany 5,700, and Japan about 2,000. The first decisive battles with the victory of the Allied forces occurred in the Coral Sea and at Midway Atoll. Japan lost 248 aircraft and 4 aircraft carriers in the last standoff, which finally demonstrated the shift of air dominance to the Americans. During the Guadalcanal campaign, the Allied forces destroyed about 20,000 Japanese and shot down 800 enemy aircraft. This defeat of the Japanese army marked the final transfer of the initiative in the Pacific to the US and its allies. Another region in which the United States joined the fight against the Hitler coalition was the Mediterranean. During Operation Torch, US troops, together with British units, captured the territory of Algeria and Morocco, which had previously been subordinate to the pro-Nazi Vichy French regime. Despite the fighting, the French units defected to the Western Allies and took part in the Tunisian campaign. The German and Italian forces were defeated in May 1943 in North Africa after that successful campaign. Italian and German losses amounted to more than 12,000 dead and 290,000 captured. The next objective of the United States and Australian forces in the Pacific was to clear New Guinea and the islands north of it from Japanese units. During the New Guinea campaign, the Allies cut off Japanese forces from supplies and established themselves in strategically important strongholds through landing operations and aerial bombardment. Japanese troops lost more than 200,000 dead during this campaign. US forces lost about 7,000 soldiers. In the meantime, after the liberation of Africa, the allies of the anti-Hitler coalition had opportunities to attack Italy. First, almost 500,000 US, British, and Canadian forces captured Sicily, defeated the Italian and German corps there, and captured 120,000 Italian soldiers. The speed of the anti-Hitler coalition's advance, the dominance of American and British air power, dissatisfaction with the fascist regime, and the catastrophic loss of life and prisoners led to the Italian coup d'etat and the temporary overthrow of Mussolini in July 1943. The fascist leader managed to regain his authority only with the help of the German army. Most of the Italian troops were disarmed by the Wehrmacht. Thus, from mid-1943, Germany was forced to fight the Western Allies almost on its own, relying on relatively few local collaborators. In September, the Western Allies' army attacked the south of the Apennines Peninsula, simultaneously landing in Calabria, Puglia, and Salerno. The German troops put up a desperate resistance, successfully used the mountainous terrain, and built strong defensive lines south of Rome. By January of the following year, the Allies had succeeded in driving Hitler's troops out of southern Italy and then breaking through their defensive redoubts in the bloody Battle of Monte Cassino, 17 January through 19 May 1944. The Italian capital Rome was liberated by the Western Allies from the German army on 4 June 1944. On 6 June, 2 days after the liberation of Rome, the Western Allies, led by Eisenhower, began the largest landing in human history on the coast of Normandy, codenamed Overlord. Using a total air advantage, the US and Allies landed more than 1 million soldiers in less than a month. They overpowered German defenses in the north of France and went on to liberate Brittany and Paris. The French capital was liberated on 25 August with substantial support from the French resistance. In addition, the forces of the anti-Hitler coalition conducted a landing in Provence in the south of France in August to September, which made it possible to advance towards the northern parts. By the end of October, almost the entire territory of France and Belgium had been cleared of Hitler's troops. Meanwhile, on the Pacific Front, the Japanese army was pushed out of the rainforests rather slowly due to fierce Japanese resistance and a difficult landscape. Therefore, the Allied command decided to launch a major attack on the Philippines and Japan. At first, the U.S. military, under the total domination of American aircraft, conducted a successful Philippines campaign. During the campaign, the 600,000-strong Western Army defeated the 530,000-strong Japanese Army, which lost 336,000 soldiers during the battle. At the same time, the U.S. ally Britain was quite successful in conquering the previously lost territories in Burma. On the Western Front, Germany was desperately trying to stop the Western Allied advance. The largest German counterattack was in the Ardennes, in which Hitler's 500,000 troops, taking a twofold advantage in tanks and artillery, crushed more than 600,000 American forces in southern Belgium. Total losses on both sides were over 200,000 killed and wounded. Attacks from the flanks of the Allied army allowed them to defeat the Wehrmacht and drove the enemy back to Germany. After this, the forces of the anti-Hitler coalition, numbering more than 4 million, had to storm the strongly fortified German defensive line of Siegfried. It was located along the Rhine and Maas rivers and defended by more than 1 million German troops. With a huge advantage in the number of aircraft, artillery, and soldiers, the Allies were able to break the German defenses and enter Germany. One of the key operations in these campaigns was the Rhineland Offensive. At this time, U.S. troops managed to overcome their opponents and consolidate on the east bank of the Rhine. At this time, on the outskirts of Japan, American troops had to take even the smallest strategically significant islands with heavy losses. During the Battle of the Little Iwo Jima, the U.S. Army lost almost 7,000 killed and 19,000 wounded, and the Japanese garrison of 22,000 almost completely died, refusing to surrender. Having passed the Siegfried Line, the Allied forces gained enormous superiority over the German troops in numbers of infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. This, combined with a strategic initiative, enabled them to quickly defeat the forces of an agonizing Germany. On 18 April, the Allied army won the Battle of the Ruhr, with German losses of only 310,000 prisoners. The northern group of armies of Britain, Canada, and the United States continued its advance eastward towards Berlin. The U.S. Southern Force captured central Germany and the strategically important city of Nuremberg. At this time, 1.3 million Allied troops launched a decisive offensive in northern Italy, where they defeated the resistance of the German army and Italian collaborators from the Republic of Salo. At the same time, American forces advancing towards Berlin met the Soviet allies on the Elbe River. The defeat of the remnants of Nazi Germany was completed on 7 May. The next day, the German command signed an act of unconditional surrender, and the country was divided by the Allies into zones of occupation. The United States administration controlled the lands of southern Germany, where the Americans were active in denazification and cultural education. After the surrender of Germany, Japan remained the Allies' last opponent. Taking into account the Japanese army's fierce response, the U.S. leadership decided to force Japan's surrender through aerial bombardment and the use of new, lethal weapons. Nuclear warheads were dropped by United States aircraft on Hiroshima on 6 August and Nagasaki on 9 August for the first and last time in combat. Nearly 80,000 people died instantly as a result of the deadly destruction, and more than 150,000 more died as a result of the irradiation and injuries received. The shocked Japanese leadership issued a decree of unconditional surrender, but in many places, Japanese troops still resisted. The final terms of the surrender of Japan were signed on 2 September 1945 aboard the battleship Missouri. That date became the official day of the end of the bloodiest war in human history. The U.S. remained formally neutral at the start of World War II, but supported its partner Britain and imposed sanctions on the aggressive Japanese Empire. This precipitated an attack by Japanese forces on the United States and Western allies, which began with the offense on Pearl Harbor. During the first year of the war, the Japanese captured Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, Indonesia, the Philippines, and much of New Guinea. Soon, however, the United States' greater economic potential allowed them to turn the tide of the Pacific War to their advantage and achieve a number of victories in the Coral Sea, Midway Atoll, and New Guinea. The buildup of U.S. military power enabled the Americans to fight alongside their allies on the Western Front from November 1942. The U.S. troops first reached North Africa, then Italy. The U.S. Army played a key role in the liberation of Italy and France. Then, together with British and Soviet forces, they took part in the final defeat of Nazi Germany. On the Pacific Front, U.S. forces destroyed almost the entire Japanese fleet and aircraft, recapturing the Philippines and a number of islands in the Pacific Ocean. They ended the Second World War by forcing Japan to surrender with nuclear weapons. In addition to military involvement, the U.S. also provided its allies with great logistical assistance within the Lend-Lease framework, which significantly accelerated the victory over common opponents.